Hello, my name is Brian Lewis and I am an instructor at J10S. And the presentation today is on loader backhoe safety, any kind of heavy piece of equipment this would apply to. But before we get started, what I'd like to do is invite you to pause the presentation and talk about any near miss or accident that you may have had in the last month since your last safety meeting. And when you're finished with that, just go ahead and press play and we'll continue with our presentation. Okay, hopefully you had a fruitful discussion and everybody is good to go. So when we talk about loader backhoe safety, any kind of machine for that matter, any kind of internal combustion engine, battery, whatever, we want to do a checklist. We want to make sure that the machine we're about to use is well maintained and good condition, because we're going to be working with this machine around people. And so what we want to do is make sure that it's adequate for that purpose. So we want to check the engine, we want to check, make sure we can see around out the windows, make sure they're not broken or dirty, make sure we check all the levers, make sure we have smooth operation. I'm sure those of you that have experience on backhoes and track hoes and heavy equipment like those realize that the number of hours that's on a machine are going to affect its operation, and you want to make sure you're good with all that, right? Of course, brakes, hydraulic hoses, make sure any of the safety features are in place and working well. Look for bolts, welds, pins, make sure they're all in good condition, no cracks. We see here rollover protection structure, or the rollover protection system, which also includes a seat belt. I know that there's quite a few people out there that do not really care to wear your seat belt, but it works in conjunction with the rollover protection system. It's integral to it, actually. So if unfortunately one of these machines turns over, you want to stay inside that cab until it comes to a stop, and undo the seat belt and walk away from the accident. Walk away from the accident. Of course, lights, gauges, horns, all this stuff is important to make sure that people on the ground in and around can see what's going on, as well as anything having to do with leaks in the hydraulics, any kind of trash buildup in the engine compartment and those things. We also want to make sure that we have the operator's manual available. It's required to be on the machine at all times. And of course, being on the machine, it needs to be intact and readable. This is important. It's a regulation. It's a requirement. We want to honor that requirement and regulation. Now you see the typical weight of the components here. I'm sure those of you familiar with track hose and backhoes realize they come in a lot of different sizes. So the main thing I would like for you to take from this slide is that the tractor is the heaviest piece of the system, the backhoe is the next heaviest piece of the system, and the loader is the lightest piece of the system, as long as it's empty. You know, that can all change depending on what you're trying to pick up and what's going on there. Now, machine stability, just like powered industrial trucks or fork trucks or forklifts, center of gravity is really, really important. Now, those of you that have operated these pieces of equipment, this is probably intuitive to you and you don't think about center of gravity so much. But anyone that's new and does not have a lot of seat time, it's really important that they understand this concept of center of gravity. It's important that when you're training them that you explain these things to them. So the center of gravity typically is in the middle of the machine, just under the operator's seat or thereabouts. And anytime you raise the backhoe or you raise the front loader, you're going to change the center of gravity. It's going to come up, and depending on what you do with the backhoe or the front loader, it's going to move out. And it's important to keep this in mind, because the higher the center of gravity and the further away from the center of the machine it is, the less stable it is. So it's important that we keep these things in mind. It's a really important concept. Also, when you get on a slope, the center of gravity moves from the center of the machine over to the tire that's on the downward side of the slope. And this is important. It's important to remember this. There again, those of you that have quite a bit of experience on these machines, you intuitively understand this and know this because of the experience you have operating the machines. But someone that's new, they need to keep this in mind. Of course, you have ways to affect this. You can move the backhoe towards the upside of the slope and use that to move the center of gravity towards the top side tire, away from the bottom side tire. That will increase the stability. And you have stabilizers, and you can deploy these things and give yourself some mechanical advantage on the slope. Outriggers, stabilizers, those things are important that we make use of them. You want to make sure that when you use a stabilizer or an outrigger, that you use it in such a way that makes it effective. So sometimes, depending on what the ground is like, or if you're on pavement in the summertime, you want to make sure you have pads underneath those outriggers or stabilizers so that you spread the weight across a greater area, make it more stable. Good idea to do. It's important to do. So keep those things in mind. Sometimes, if you're not paying attention, even though you've got the stabilizers deployed and you've got your machine level, you still have to be careful about how you deploy the backhoe, because if you deploy it to the downward slope, you are going to change the center of gravity and you are going to make the machine inherently less stable. So we want to be careful with that, right? Talking about the front loader, same kind of issue is if you're trying to load a dump truck or something else, and you've got it on a slope. When you raise that front loader with whatever aggregate or whatever material you've got in that bucket, you're going to change the center of gravity, and it's already, if you're on a slope, it's already over the tire. When you raise the center of gravity, you're making it more likely to tip. So we want to make sure that we're on level ground and make sure when we're using that front loader so that we don't change the center of gravity in a bad way and cause a mess, basically cause a mess. Now, as an operator or driver, operator of backhoes, trackhoes, loaders, heavy equipment, the driver has a lot that they have to maintain control of and be responsible for. So, as you've heard me say multiple times, a good safety and health program, the person, the individual is responsible for themselves, and they're responsible for the people around them. Now, as an operator, you are responsible for yourself. You're responsible for the safety, the operating the machine that you're in charge of safely. You're responsible for you, of course, wearing a seatbelt and keeping yourself safe. You are responsible not to destroy property that you may have access to, and not the least, for sure, you're responsible for the people working in and around the machine. You're responsible. They have a responsibility to you as well to maintain their safety. We'll talk about that here in another slide or two. But the operator has a lot going on. So that's why the pre-inspection or pre-operation inspection is important. That's why you want to operate the machine in a safe, responsible manner, and protect all that's going on around you. Some things that, affect everyone's awareness, but particularly the operator. They're the ones that are operating a big hunk of metal with an engine on it, and fatigue and hunger. Sometimes we end up working long hours late at night, and hunger, anything like that's going to cause a distraction. Weather. If we're talking about July and August and it's 95 degrees and 85% humidity and it's just miserable, nobody really enjoys that. It causes you to be distracted. Same thing maybe in January and February when we're at our coldest time. Bodies, the muscles, ligaments, stiff, don't like to move. You want some heat so that your body feels good and that you can operate in an optimal way, right? And there again, emotional level, when we talk about that, we all have to realize none of us are robots. And we have lives, work lives, where we're here at work doing stuff, and we have home lives, we're lives with our families and friends. And none of us are immune to tragedy or some kind of emotional distress. Things like that can really affect all of us. And like I said, you have to watch out for yourself, but you also have a responsibility to watch out for the people that you work with. And if someone is distracted due to some event that's happened in their life, it's important that you help them gain focus on what they're doing. It may be that you need to ask them to do something with a little bit less responsibility than what they normally have. Because when you're operating, working in and around loaders, backhoes, heavy equipment, we need to keep our concentration on the work that's being done and people's safety. So some other things, physical health. People have different health issues. They need to stay on top of that. The working conditions on the property, the ground that you're working on, that's important. That affects awareness. Other people. Now, members of the public, there are some really good, well-meaning members of the public that ask seemingly crazy questions, and they tend to be a little nosy, and they want to have conversation. And so those people are maybe a little difficult, but not a threat. As we've talked about dealing with workplace violence in the past, there are people that are a threat. And so everybody has to work together to identify those situations and try to come up, with a solution where no one gets hurt. So it's important that we maintain our safety from outside threats, as well as the safety of dealing with the inherent hazards of dealing and working around heavy equipment. That's really important that we realize there's a lot of stuff there. For the safe operation, we want to keep the company policies, whether they're written or verbal, in the front of our thoughts when we operate this types of equipment. We don't want to take things for granted. We want to make sure we face the machine when we mount and dismount or climb on and off the machine. We want the machine as clean as it can be. We want mud and grease off our shoes. I know that that's nearly impossible. It's important, though, that you have good footing when you climb on and climb off these machines. I hate to say this, but there's a lot of people have died or had pretty bad injuries just from falling, climbing on and off the machine, not using 3 points of contact, and being real cavalier, jumping on and off, doing different things and being goofy. And you'd be surprised, sprained ankles, messed up knees, messed up lower backs. And actually, I personally have investigated a fatality where somebody fell off a machine. So it seems like it's unlikely, but it's possible. So keep that in mind. Loose clothing and jewelry is always a no-no. No one wants to get caught into or be pulled into a machine. We'll make sure we wear all our PPE, make sure we keep the safety guards in place, always make sure that we're operating the machine within its operator's manual's guidelines as far as the weights we're working with. Always plan ahead, something that's not said very often or not always performed, but we need, before we start work on a backhoe, track hoe, piece of heavy equipment, we need to do a little bit of a walk around of the property and try and make a really good determination if the ground's soft or not. And if it's soft, of course, that's going to inform us how we use our outriggers, stabilizers, as well as how hard we cut the wheel when we're moving. You can absolutely tip one over if you're not careful on soft ground. So keep that in mind. It's always good to do that and plan ahead. I've already mentioned seat belts, but it's important to keep mentioning seat belts because people that don't want to wear their seat belts are really animate about it. But I'm telling you, that seat belt, as uncomfortable as it may make you feel, is integral to keep you inside that cab and keep you safe if you're the operator. It is also, I'm sure, in just about every case, a work safety rule. And if the employer's got a rule that you wear your seatbelt, then you need to follow the rule. You need to follow the rule and keep yourself safe. We talked about mounting, dismounting, or climbing on and off the machine. 3 points of contact is what's needed here. It's what's required here. Just like on a ladder, you're required to have 3 points of contact. You're required to have 3 points of contact when mounting and dismounting the machine. So keep that in mind. As I've already mentioned, people get a little cavalier and jump on and off stuff, and there's been a lot of knees, ankles, and backs jammed, messed up, and had surgeries and all kinds of things, even unfortunately fatalities. So keep that in mind. As I said before, you know you have a good safety program when everyone in the workplace looks out for themselves, follows safety rules that's in place, disciplines themselves to follow the safety rules and to evaluate their areas and their work environment so that it is safe. And you also look out for other people, your co-workers, and you hold them accountable and look out for them as well. It is everyone's responsibility and job to make sure everyone goes home with the same number of fingers and toes that they came to work with, and they're maybe worn out, maybe tired, but not any worse for the wear. Not any worse for the wear, right? Now, part of that is, as a person that's working on the ground and as the operator of a backhoe, track hoe, front loaders, all that heavy equipment, is to understand danger around the backhoe and around the front loader and the swing area. Now, if we were talking about cranes, we would talk about barricading that swing area or that area where the counterweight and the actual crane move. But backhoes, track hoes, other mobile type equipment, that's not practical because these machines are made to move. They're made to move. So we cannot use an engineering solution and put up a barricade. What we can use is an administrative solution where people are on the ground, are trained, and are aware that they're not to get within the swing area while the backhoe, track hoe, front loader are in operation. It's really important. It's really important we do that. It's important that we maintain eye contact. If you are going to approach someone operating a piece of equipment, a piece of heavy equipment, you want to maintain eye contact. You do not want to be outside of that person's vision. And in fact, if you're going to approach it because you have something to say, whether you use signals, signs, radios, whatever method you use to communicate, you need to make sure you use that communication method. Let the operator of the machine know, I need to have a word with you. Allow them to set the backhoe or the front loader down, and then, or the bucket down, and then when they tell you to approach them, then you approach them. And we just have to do it this way, because that metal, your body's not going to dent that metal, but that metal is going to really do a number on your body. So we have to maintain this type of administrative control to make sure everybody stays safe. Do not enter the swing danger area until you have communicated with the operator that you need to have a word with them. Allow them to set the bucket down, to set the front loader down, and then let them tell you, communicate to you that it's okay to approach them and have a conversation. That's the way we need to do that. Now, ground workers, it's important. You need to always be facing the machine when you're working around the machine. So you need to be in sight of the operator. The operator needs to be able to see you, number one. Number two, you need to work facing the machine so that you can see the machine. It's vitally important that the operator be able to see you and that you are able to see the operator and the machine. This is important for communication. It's just vitally important for communication. It's vitally important to make sure that you're not put in harm's way. Everybody needs to be looking out. This is a dangerous situation, and for the administrative controls to work correctly, you need to stay outside of the swing area, and you need to have visual confirmation that you're in a safe area. Now, excavating hazards. We should all know, if we don't, about calling 811 and having people locate services before you start digging. And if you've worked in water, wastewater, gas, public utilities, much at all, you have experience in people nicking your lines, breaking your lines, leaks, and all those things, no matter what it is. No matter what the material is or what the system is. It's absolutely important that we know the location, know the types of utilities, understand the hazards that we're potentially dealing with, and make sure that we treat that with respect. I know most of the time it's other people that break your lines, and you have to go out and fix them. But it can occasionally happen to utilities as well, right? One thing that's really important for me to point out, I believe, is that when we're talking about excavations and trenches, as you probably know, there is a rule that the spoil pile stays at least 2 feet away from the edge of the trench. And the reason for this is twofold with the spoil pile. One, you don't want rocks, clay, different things falling down and hitting somebody in the head while they're working there. It's also important that you do not put any extra weight on the wall of that trench, whether it be dirt, whether it be materials, or whether it be a backhoe, track hoe, loader, or some other type of heavy equipment. When you put pressure or put weight on that wall, there's only one place it can go, and that's into the trench. So if you put a stabilizer down, if the wheel is on the edge, you can absolutely create a cave-in type situation, and where maybe someone gets hurt or caught in the cave-in or even killed. Not to mention that you destabilize that loader backhoe, and it can go right on in with it. You can go right on in with it. This is why we have requirements for heavy equipment or any other equipment, that you have someone directing traffic for them, giving them hand signals when they have to stop, or you have stop logs in place to keep them from getting that close to the trench or the excavation. So that's really important. So when you lift with a backhoe, which is something that people do from time to time, please refer to the operator's manual and the manufacturer's recommendations. Whatever you're going to lift, it's important that you know the limits of the machine, and try not to approach the limits, let alone exceed the limits. It's not a good idea to do that. So just refer to that operator's manual. Realize that the further out you move that bucket, the less weight that bucket is going to be able to lift. That's just physics. When you extend it beyond the tractor, there's only so much it's going to be able to lift. And I might also put in there in a recent training session, someone rightly pointed out that if you're not careful and you're inside that swing radius and hydraulics fail, there's nothing to keep that bucket from coming down and smacking you in the head and potentially killing you. So keep that in mind. It's very important, very important. So controlling worksite access before you start excavating, you want to do everything you can to keep unauthorized persons from entering the workspace. One, they've, in most cases, if not all cases, have not had any kind of safety training about gaining the attention of the operator. They don't know to face the machine. They don't know to gain the operator's permission by whatever means of communication that's been established before you get within the swing area. Make sure the bucket and the front loader are down on the ground before they approach. So barriers, caution tape, all these things can happen. Most of the time, like I said, people in the public, they're curious and they want to have a conversation. But you also have to understand that there are people out there, unfortunately, in today's world that have ill intent, and you might have to deal with a workplace violence situation. So whoever's operating the piece of heavy equipment, backhoe, front loader, track hoe, needs to be aware of this, and the people on the ground need to be aware of this as well. And work as a team. Work as a team. So when you transport the machine, it's really important that we use locking pins to secure the backhoe. If you have to, use chains other than what you're dogging the tractor portion down with to secure the front loader. It's really important that when you use chains or straps to secure that machine to the trailer, that one, that they are labeled and have the load capacity that's appropriate for the weight of the machine that you're transporting. It's important that you inspect the chains. It's important that you inspect the straps, make sure they're adequate, make sure that they're in good shape, make sure that they are labeled. It's also really important that you use a 45-degree angle on all four corners of the machine, and that you dog those things down, make sure they're tight. Now, the 45-degree angles are important, and if you can't get a good 45-degree angle, then you need to reposition that backhoe, track hoe, heavy piece of equipment so that you can get a good 45-degree angle. This 45-degree angle is important on all four corners of the machine because it keeps the heavy piece of equipment from moving frontwards or backwards, from side to side, and in some cases keeps it on the trailer if you have some kind of situation where you hit a bump, whatever it may be, keeps it from coming off the trailer. Most machines have attachment points where you can attach a chain or a strap. If you can't access those, or it does not provide a good 45-degree angle, you can always use the axles. But if you're going to use the axles, you need to remember that you do not want to compromise the brake lines or any hydraulic lines. So when you're talking about these things and tying down the machines and using something besides a tie down point, you have to be really careful. You don't want to do any damage. You want to follow the operator's manual for that. So keep that in mind. This is really important. You do not want that piece of heavy equipment coming off that trailer. It can be a bad day, a very bad day. So if you're going to drive the backhoe to the job site, which is a completely legitimate thing to do, you want to make sure you got your seatbelt on. Maintain control over that piece of equipment. I know that people who operate these machines, they take pride in what they do. They take pride in doing a good job and pride in doing it in a timely manner. And that's absolutely wonderful qualities. But we also need to maintain control of these machines, especially when they're being operated on over-the-road roadways, right? So we don't want to bounce the machine all over the place by driving so fast. We want to pay attention to what the drivers around us are doing. Make sure that we pay close attention. People who drive over-the-road vehicles do not always respect people who are driving backhoes down the road, pieces of heavy equipment. They have an attitude that you are, in fact, in their way, and they don't give you the respect you need and deserve when operating a piece of equipment like this. So you have to be attentive to all that kind of situations and do your best, like I said, to maintain control and do the things that are necessary so that you don't cause some kind of traffic hazard. That's important. I appreciate everybody for paying attention. I appreciate Jeremy for doing this PowerPoint. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with your local JTNS instructor. As always, I don't promise that we know the answer to every question there is out there, but if we don't know the question, what we will do is do our very best to find the answer to the question and get back with you. Thanks. Have a great day and a great month until we talk or see each other again in a presentation. Thank you.